Imagine moving into what you believe is your dream home, and 28 days later, running in terror. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville didn't just go bad, it turned hostile. And by the time the family fled, the walls had already begun whispering. Stay with me. We're exploring the Amityville Horror as I know it. The book. Good evening, everyone. I'm Steak Belmont, and welcome back to my strange pages. Tonight is our Halloween special. I'm all dressed up, and we're diving into one of the most iconic haunted house accounts in modern American history. The Amityville story, but we're going beyond the movie versions. You'll hear the details from the book by Jay Anson. The oddities, the subtle shifts in behavior, the monsters, the cold rooms, the green slime, the red eyes. We'll ask, did something evil really move in? And if so, what did it want? You know what? I wrote let's get started, but in honor of Halloween, it's showtime! In December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz moved into the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. George ran a land surveying company. They looked at around 50 houses before settling on this one. The listing read, 6-bedroom, Dutch colonial, spacious living room, formal dining, enclosed porch, 3.5 baths, finished basement, 2-car garage, heated pool, and large boathouse. Asking $80,000. Now, from the start, something felt off. George noticed that the neighbor's shades were drawn on the sides facing his house, but open in the front. It was like the neighbors refused to look at what was happening behind the walls. On page 19 of Anson's book, we get this. Father Mancuso hears a deep, masculine voice in the house, commanding him to get out. Later on, the father admitted to suffering just by being in the place. Every story has a breaking point, that moment when strange coincidences start to feel like warnings. For George and Kathy Lutz, that moment came with cold spots, red eyes, and a little girl's imaginary friend who might not have been imaginary at all. The house began to change in ways that no one could explain. A black stain appeared in the toilets. A foul odor clung in the air. Flies gathered near a window in the dead of winter. The front door, a 250-pound slab of wood, was ripped off one of its hinges, as if something had tried to force its way in. Missy's room was on the second floor. It was the one room where people were told to avoid. That's where she said her friend lived, a pig named Jody. One night, George woke up at 3:15 a.m. again, that same cursed time. On his way back from checking the boathouse, he looked up. There was Missy standing at her bedroom window, staring down at him, but she wasn't alone. Behind her was the face of a pig, red eyes, of course, glaring through the glass. Well, George sprinted upstairs, heart pounding. Missy was fast asleep, but as he turned to leave, her rocking chair began to move on its own. It wasn't playful, it was deliberate. From that night on, the house was never still again. Cold air poured through the rooms, no matter how high they turned up the heat. George Lutz, well, he complained that he could never get warm. Even when the house rose to 90 degrees on its own, a chill lingered underneath, like the house was breathing through their skin. Sometimes it wasn't cold at all. Kathy described a sweet smell in the kitchen that felt comforting at first, almost motherly, until it pressed in on her, smothered her with invisible hands. When it finally let go, she broke down crying. That's when Missy walked up and said, "Jody said it'll all be better soon." And just when things seemed to settle, the house found new ways to remind them who was really in control. Aunt Teresa, Kathy's relative and a former nun, came to visit, but refused to enter the sewing room or the playroom. A random neighborhood kid, Bobby, stopped by the house one afternoon. He never came back. Then George found something buried in the basement. Inside a closet, beneath the stairs, was a hidden room that reeked of blood. When he turned out the light, he thought he saw a face appear on the plywood wall. A bearded face. Later he realized it was the image of Ronald DeFeo. Neighbors still couldn't explain how DeFeo had murdered 6 people with a high-powered rifle without anyone hearing a single shot. Not even Father Mancuso or Sergeant Gianfrido could make sense of it. The deeper George stared into that house, the more it stared back. His appearance started to change. People said he looked like DeFeo. Even the bartender at the local pub, the Witch's Brew, thought he was him. Then came the night when Kathy looked past George's shoulder and froze. At the living room window were the unblinking red eyes. Outside in the fresh snow were hoof prints, enormous ones, that led to the garage, where the heavy door had been torn nearly off its hinges. The cold wasn't just physical anymore. It had become something intelligent. A presence that could mock, taunt, and move between rooms. Missy still spoke to Jody. The rocking chair still creaked, and George and Kathy started to realize the objects in the house weren't just moving. Well, they were responding. Because by this point, the house wasn't haunted. It was alive. The Shinnecock Native Americans used the land for sick, mad, and dying. One John Ketchup, forced out of Salem for witchcraft, had been buried 500 feet from the house. George finds a well in the basement, and then medium Francine says bodies are buried beneath the house. All these occurrences, well, they may be part of the past, but the past won't stay in the past. All these occurrences and phenomena, well, they come to a head. Windows on the second floor, they fling open. Temperatures in rooms spin between blazing hot and freezing cold. George hears a band, a marching band, playing at 3 a.m. When even the kids, well, they sleep right through it. George is pinned by an unseen force. Drawers move, hoofs stomp on him. Missy screams about Jody and the Pig Eyes return. They try to flee in a van. It won't start. A storm is coming in. There's green slime in the playroom. And, well, it seems that the Amityville house has them. On the 28th day, they flee. January 14th, 1976, they leave all their belongings, all their money, their dream home. Father Mancuso, taken ill multiple times, refuses ever to go back. George sells out his company interest. Missy won't talk about Jody. Danny and Chris still see things. George insists they are real, and they do inflict evil when the opportunity presents itself. And that's the final page of the Amityville Horror as Anson writes it. A family broken, a house with a reputation, and the world forever changed for those who read or watch the account. Now that's the story as Jay Anson tells it. But this is where I have to be honest. I've been obviously being overly dramatic with the retelling of this, putting in some of the parts that I found interesting. I like the Amityville Horror, but not always for the reasons you'd expect. If it wasn't for the supernatural horror, this book almost reads like a YA novel. It's full of moments like this. I wrote this down specifically. Kathy woke up. She was in the bedroom of her beautiful new home. Her husband was next to her, and her 3 children were in their own bedrooms. Wasn't that marvelous? With an exclamation point. God had been good to them. A lot of that might come down to when it was written. The style feels very of its time, dramatic, a little cliche, and sometimes predictable by today's standards. If I had to rename the book, I would call it the Amityville exclamation point, because nearly every chapter ends with one. The characters, the narration, even the demons seem to shout. It's pretty predictable that you'll pretty much find when something is about to happen, there will be an exclamation point. Punching it home. Father Mancuso was pushed. He turned around. There was no one there! Exclamation point. It gives the whole story kind of like, I don't know, like it's yelling at you, but it's also very like, I don't know, juvenile. Still, for all its uneven pacing and overexcited, storytelling, I'd say that I kind of have to give it, obviously, to Jay Anson for capturing something, a mix of fear, faith, and psychological, horrors that make you wonder, was any of it real? Maybe that's why the story still lingers decades later. I guess, I did kind of crap on it there at the end, but I do have to hand it to them, like I said, even if it's all completely, made up to capitalize on the DeFeo murders, which is pretty scummy, but it's definitely something that has become a huge deal. The Amityville Horror, people know what that is. It's like The Exorcist. I guess these days it would be The Conjuring. And that's another thing. At the end of the book, Ed and Lorraine Warren show up with a bunch of other people, and they're kind of now outed as being, what's the word? Charlatans, frauds, fakes, hoaxing a lot of stuff. But as a novel, if you don't pick this up and look at the back where it says nonfiction, it's not bad. It is around 200 and let's see here, how many pages? 237 pages. But I would have to say that you could probably cut that in half. It's very slow. I know that a lot of movies have been made, versions for the Amityville Horror, which rightfully so. I mean, everybody likes a good haunted house story, and it's definitely influenced so many depictions of that. But I think that it definitely needed tightening up. I think this was maybe like a one-pass kind of deal by Jay Anson. I saw that he had written another book, 666, that was kind of his other book that he ever wrote, and then he did script writing and stuff like that for movies and TV. So, having said that, maybe he parlayed those skills into writing a pretty good horror book that turned into a phenomenon. I'm going to go ahead and talk about a couple things that didn't make it into the video here real quick. Something interesting. In the account, there's an Aunt Teresa on Cassie's side that used to be a nun. She only shows up once in the book. I thought that was going to be a bigger thing. It's kind of an interesting thing to have a character that used to be religious but now has kids. They don't really ever talk more about why she gave up her faith. But I thought it would have been interesting if they had kind of explored that a little bit more, especially since this has a lot of stuff to do with religion and the devil, possibly. There's a couple there's like things in this where like random people will show up. They're never mentioned again. I don't know what that was about. I guess that's fine, to cut that. Unless it was in the movie. I can't remember. I haven't seen it in a long time. There is obviously talk about the DeFeos, about how, Ronald DeFeo, killed his family and said he was possessed by the devil, and then the events happen in the house to the Lutzes. It's weird. Okay, so in the book, let me just go ahead and. So in the book, let me go ahead and pick this up. So there's a foreword, which is fine. There's, the end of the actual book here. There's an epilogue as well. So, okay. The weird thing about this is there's a whole part where they flee. They go to Kathy's mother's house, and then they, are assaulted, chased by the ghosts again. George and Kathy end up floating in the air once they've gone to bed. They recoiled in horror. Coming up the steps towards them was a snake-like line of greenish-black slime. George knew he was not dreaming. It was all real. Whatever he thought they had left forever back at 112 Ocean Avenue was following them, wherever the Lutzes fled. As far as my knowledge, I don't ever hear anything about that in the accounts, And then it's never mentioned again in the epilogue. That part was... It's, even more that they took accounts from the Lutzes, and then this dude just kind of, made a bunch of crap up. Not to mention, obviously, whether or not you believe this, but just saying, he embellished. And then it kind of gets straight... The epilogue is just straight, real talk accounts here. Where he says, they are real, George insists, he's being interviewed. The rest of the book doesn't have anything like that, where there's any kind of stuff like that. And then there's an afterword where, he talks about how, these are the actual accounts as I know them. But there's obviously some embellishment by him, and they just said, okay, whatever, thanks for the money. Yeah, that was, I guess I'll put this part in where, kind of before the very end. So, back to me doing the thing. Halloween is here. What are you dressing up as for Halloween? Let me know in the comments. So, Jay Anson, let's go ahead and read his biography here on the back of the book. About the author. It's not very long, but here we go. About the author. Jay Anson began as a copy boy in the New York Evening Journal in 1937, and later worked in advertising and publicity. With more than 500 documentary scripts for television to his credit, documentaries, my bad, he was associated with Professional Films Incorporated. He died in 1980. So he died, he passed away, 3 years after his book was published here? 1977? Dang, okay, well, what a way to go out, I guess. Speaking of a way to go out, so what do we take away from this tale? For me, it's the collision of the mundane and the monstrous. A respectful family, a dream home, and then a leak into the world they thought was safe. The details are weird, the timeline compressed, the warning clear. When you cross into something you don't understand, you risk more than fear. You risk yourself. So everybody, this is Steak. If you've enjoyed the breakdown of the Amityville Horror, hit like, leave a comment with the moment that chills you the most. And it could be from the book or from the movies. Was it the pig's eyes? The boathouse door? The levitation? The monster on the stairs? And don't forget to subscribe for more Stakes pages. Until next time, happy Halloween, everyone. This has been Stake Belmont. Stay in the light, watch your back, and sleep well. If you can. Okay, well, I guess I'm dressed as Beetlejuice, so I don't really know what to do now. I guess I'll just fade away.